Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Extraordinary Women in Tech. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss how women and marginalized groups can cultivate confidence, creative and personal integrity, and a sense of self-worth, and how we can in turn pay it forward by becoming voices that reaffirm and lift up others. So in the spirit of finding our voices, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce herself and what it was about the themes of this webinar that resonated with them. Shayna, let's start with you.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today, and I'm excited to be here. I'm Shayna Hale. I'm the GM and Executive Creative Director at The Trade Desk, which is a digital advertising technology company where I've been working as the Creative Director in ECD for the last 6.5 years. I oversee our in-house creative agency, which we call the TTD Creative Shop. And that's where I oversee our creative campaign development globally, as well as our brand and visual identity across all touch points. I think in terms of what really resonated for me about this particular topic was the notion of finding your voice as a woman is just inherently challenging. It took me a really long time to find mine, and I'm still not entirely there 17 years later. I didn't really have a linear path as well. I started as a photography major actually at NYU. And once I graduated, I think I came to this realization around two things. One was as a photographer's assistant, I really wanted health insurance and probably wasn't able to get that in a freelance role. But I think more importantly, having been a little burnt out doing what I loved 24/7, what I was really passionate about 24/7, I kind of came to this conclusion where I have this little mantra I say to myself, which is don't do what you love, do what you like. And I know that's sort of counter sometimes to what you oftentimes hear, which is do what you love what you do. And I think my just advice from that and really around finding your voice has to do with the notion of save something that you really love for yourself. And really do something that really brings you enjoyment in what you do on your day-to-day, but find ways in which you're able to share, to find something and save something for yourself creatively. So just sort of some sage advice, I think, in my kind of way of growing into my role as hopefully as a creative leader in the last time. But that's sort of my what really resonated to me about this topic.
Thank you, Shayna. Tori?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am the VP of Creative and co-head of Post Studios, which is the in-house creative studio for the New York Post, Page Six, and Decider.com. We oversee branded content, custom rich media, shoppable video, merchandise, experiential events, and new product branding for consumer marketing and podcasts. And yes, we still do print advertising. I think what resonated with me for this was finding my voice sort of started by coming up in a family where everybody was a creative. Everybody in my family went to art school. It was sort of like expected, not expected, but how could I be a little bit different when everyone else is sort of in the same place? My dad ran a creative studio. My mom studied fashion design and was later a freelance graphic artist. So it was sort of in the family. But I found a new way to do it, which was cool. I ended up going to the School of Visual Arts, where I majored in advertising and graphic design. I started with we had really great professors there who were working artists, which was a really great experience to have those connections and learn from people who were really in the business and working in the city. My first internship was with Print Magazine, which was really a great experience. And from then I moved more into film and marketing with Tribeca Film Festival and events, obviously. And from there, everything sort of snowballed and came together, and now I'm sort of just doing a little bit of everything, which is a lot of fun to have something different every day. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Tori. Kathy, how about you?
Hey, my name is Kathy Davenport Lee. I use she, her pronouns, and my current title is VP of Interactive Design at HBO in the marketing department. I currently run a team of 28 different creatives with a small design ops team. And I've been doing digital design for 21 years now, which is crazy. I can't believe that. Yeah, I mean, I think what sort of drew me to this topic is kind of what you all have already said, is it is really hard to find your voice when you sort of look around you and there isn't a template for like what you want to do in your life. And I think that, you know, like 20 something years ago when I started, there was definitely, I never saw a female creative director. I never saw a woman like running one of the agencies or the companies that I worked at. And it felt a little hopeless because it seemed like I wasn't cut out for it. I wasn't like right and have the right personality. It wasn't, you know, I just like didn't look like was it what I was supposed to. And so I feel like that really makes me feel very empathetic towards people who might be feeling like that now in 2022. And I think it is really important to talk about it and sort of get it out there and like discuss the difficulties.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I think, you know, we talk a lot about what it's like to be a creative, what it's like to be a leader as a woman, and it is very important. And I think it's also important that we just take a moment and realize that a lot of what we're going to discuss is also applicable to people who may not identify as women, but are coming from a disadvantaged or minority background. So let's keep that in mind throughout the session today. And we're going to get into some deep themes. So I actually want to start us off with something a little bit fun and light. And that question is, you know, I think all four of us are very fortunate to work in roles that are both personally and creatively fulfilling, sometimes very hard won. But that said, if you could have any job besides the one that you have today, what would it be? So for example, I would love to direct stage plays. Kathy, let me go back to you.
Oh my gosh, what job? I honestly would love to be a fashion designer. Wait, that's still a designer though. I'd love to be a writer. Let's say writer. Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Tori.
I think, well, also design. So interior design, architecture is a big second choice for me, yeah.
All right. Shayna, I'm curious about your answer. You said this one was a little bit of a struggle for you.
Well, yeah, a little bit, because I really just, I love working in a creative, and this is, you know, still cheating because it's still a creative role, but probably a pastry chef. I think one of my creative outlets is doing developing novelty cakes. And I made a Magnum PI Tom Selleck cake for my husband's birthday a few years ago. And I think it brings me endless joy. So that would probably be my answer on that one.
All right, I'm going to remember that for the next birthday party. All right, thank you. So let's get into our questions. Starting with the first one, I think, again, let's take a little bit broader view here, but as women in leadership, as women who are creatives, have you had to overcome a crisis of confidence? Shayna?
Yeah, well, I think kind of what Kathy mentioned about creative in general tends to be a somewhat male-dominated leadership type of leadership roles. I feel like a lot of times when agencies come in to pitch, a lot of times I notice that my counterpart on the other end of the table is not female. And so I think that just starting a little bit at a disadvantage that we're not more widely represented is something that, you know, working in the industry is something that you notice. But that said, I remember reading an article a few years ago that I thought was really interesting, that when women are applying for jobs, they tend to tick all of the check marks at like all the marks of like what the job description is, like, can I do this? Can I do that? And if they find that there's aspects of the job that they're not qualified for, they don't apply. However, there's a higher percentage of men who may not have all of the experience, but still, you know, still apply and sort of have that fake it until you make it mentality, because there's an increased amount of confidence in their confidence in themselves and what they're able to achieve. And so I think that, you know, that crisis of confidence kind of starts with women having better belief in their abilities and what they're capable of. I think if everybody to some degree started with a place of like, well, I don't know how to do that. It's really hard to continue to grow in your career. And I would say just one other thing around that is, if everyone I hired was on paper somebody that was perfect for the role, then I think you would really be limiting the scope of people that you're looking at. Not everybody is going to be like, quote unquote, the right fit. And people come from all different walks of life and have, different experiences that they can bring to a position. So luckily, if you are in the world of creative, a lot of skill sets are quite transferable. And once you know one thing, it's quite easy to learn the next. So to give other female designers and creative leads an opportunity, even though on paper it may not seem that they have ticked every single box.
Yeah, absolutely. Tori, what have you noticed about that?
I think from an example from my life would be in this role when I started, my boss sort of hinted that, someday he would leave and I would be in charge. And my first reaction was like, no way, there is no way that I'm going to be, and like, I can't possibly do that. And he was so supportive and believed in me. And I'll never forget that, because he just sort of said, of course you can. What are you talking about? Like, you're just talking yourself out of it in a way. And I think that is what Shayna's talking about. You have to believe in yourself, and there's no reason that you can't do it. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Tori, I love that story, because I think so many times men will ask, well, what can I do? How can I be an ally? How can I help? And I think this story really illustrates that when you're finding your voice, it is about looking inward, but other people can be very instrumental in seeing something in you that maybe you don't see yourself.
Yeah, it's important to remember to tell the people around you too how important they are and what a great job they're doing. I remember to tell people that, because I remember what it meant to me, and yeah, pay it forward for sure.
That's very beautiful. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about taking risks. When we were chatting about this theme initially, I think several of you had talked about ways in which taking risks was very instrumental in finding your voice. So I'd like to ask about that. How important has risk-taking been? What role has it played in your professional development? And Tori, let me go back to you.
I think for me, risk-taking has always been about saying yes. I think a lot of us are intimidated by the worries that, the imposter syndrome, that we can't do it, we won't fit in, we're faking it till we make it. But the important part is to do what you say that you're going to do, and getting things done, and people will eventually trust you to make it happen, and there will be a reward in the end. It's only, a risk if you don't try everything. So
Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a lot of different thoughts about this question, but kind of off of what you just said, Tori, like, I think especially like as I was sort of working my way up, I had this like little mental game I would play with myself where I would be like, wow, I really wish I had, like, I wish you're an art director. And then I would sort of like, I would be like, hey, Kathy, well, but what's like the best version? Like, what would be like the blue sky, everything? Like, if nothing were a limit, what would you want? And I would kind of like challenge myself to think about like, what's the, like, I didn't phrase it to myself at this point in time, but like, what is sort of my like overarching goal that I want? I think like when I look back at my life, there are some things I feel like seem really risky. Like the first big job I got in New York, I got the job and they told me I had to be there in 2 weeks, and I was living in San Francisco at the time. And I just like left a bunch of my stuff there. Like I left my bicycle there, and I moved across the country. And that was like many years ago now. But in reality, like when I think about it, it wasn't risk taking in the sense that like I didn't know what was going to happen. It was risky because like this was the job that I really wanted, and the risk was like risking being disappointed that I wasn't going to get it. And once I got it, like like I had already made all of the decisions. So like going over there in 2 weeks, it kind of was like, whatever, this is like the direction I'm trying to take.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's almost like the risk of wanting something and not getting it, or the risk of failing, or trying hard and being disappointed. I love that game. I'm going to play that with myself. What would be the biggest best if there were no obstacles? So one thing that I love about this panel is that this is the first time we've had an Extraordinary Women in Tech edition composed of women in leadership in media. And I want to talk about media because we have all been discussing the ways in which finding your own voice is influenced by the media you consume, by the voices around you. So it's interesting that now we are ourselves creators of media, and we're adding to those voices that are shaping the way maybe young people are seeing themselves. So what responsibility does that entail? Kathy, let me start with you.
I mean, I think that there's, when I think about my current job, like there's a responsibility to make sure that your team has diverse voices, and that like you think about the audiences that you're creating for the people on your team should, reflect that. And it might not be some perfect one-to-one or something like that, but you have a responsibility to understand what you're communicating to these different, communities via social channels or whatever. And like, that might not be possible for somebody who like isn't part of that community. Like you might miss something, and that's really critical. It's important. I mean, I think like as far as other things, like just like advocating for growth, like at the individual designer level, certainly like the people on your own team, but also growth in the industry. I think there's a lot of like systemic and pipeline issues just in design that deserve to be looked at. And there's actually a lot of organizations that are already tackling this that we've been lucky to partner with the past few years. So for instance, like, my God, it just the name just went out of my head. We've been working with an organization called TAP, the Animation Project. That's what it stands for. And they find and work with designers in like disadvantaged communities, and offer them like education, internships, and other kinds of partnerships. So I think it's really important to also think about how you like build a future for the community too.
I love that. I think you had shared that you've seen some really specific examples of that in action, and I won't let you go into the details here just to protect all that proprietary information, but I found it so fascinating, right? That you're here, there are shows that are being put out, and you have had a direct influence in making sure that there are diverse voices represented there. I think that's so powerful. Shayna, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for my end of things, it's more around advertising. I mean, I think we have a tremendous responsibility as creatives to make sure that we're developing media and advertising that really represents, women and diverse groups, that they really see themselves and feel represented in the work. Most recently, I've been working on a campaign with my team, and it was, very crucial for us to ensure that we were really representing just like every voice, every person, just to ensure that, we had diverse representation across all walks of life. But in addition to that, to Kathy's point, it's also really important as we're hiring, and the responsibility you have as, people managers and people that are hiring diverse talent to hire from both diverse backgrounds within, but also just diversity of thought. I'd also add that even with, hiring people with, diverse backgrounds, it's also, I guess one thing I would probably add is as leaders, it's really crucial that we are welcoming ideas that are different than ours. Like we talk about diversity of thought a lot. And I think one thing that I think is a little bit challenging maybe as you grow into more of a leadership role and you're less of an individual contributor is having to see ideas that are different than yours come to fruition, and sort of accepting the fact that somebody got the same brief and where they landed is very different than mine, and that's great. I love the fact that they have a unique perspective and a unique view. So I think the combination of, bringing on diverse talent, hiring diverse creative talent, whether it's illustrators, photographers, directors, that you're, kind of opening your range of different talent that you'd like to work with, as well as the people that are represented in your creative, is a responsibility I think that we all take a part in.
Shayna, thank you. I think that's so important and really hard for any creative leader to accept, is that you can, rather than tightly controlling the outputs to be along a certain line, maybe that's your signature brand, rather than that, to actually open that a little bit and say, well, what might it look like if someone else from a different perspective took this brief and created with that and ran with it. I think that that's such a great takeaway for leadership in the creative world in particular, but even more broadly, right? To come from a perspective of empowerment versus control. Thank you. Let's back up though. We're talking about media. Why is it important? How powerful is narrative? Are there examples that we can share? And media, I mean, broadly. So this could be advertising, it could be television, it could be print, it could be any number of things. But Shayna, let me ask you that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many different ways to kind of go about answering this, but I think the key to engaging narrative or engaging storytelling is to really start with a strategic creative brief that really narrows in on what you're trying to say. Like, that's kind of the first most crucial piece, is to really understand your audience and how you're trying to connect with them on a really emotionally resonant way. I think once you have that, information from the stakeholders that are briefing you, it's really important to, I mean, from my point of view, to try to avoid jargon in every way, shape, and form you can. I love this example that Apple had from the beginning of when the iPod. So I'm like, which I was it? The iPod. I remember seeing there was like an early kind of comparison of, you could easily go down the rabbit hole of like every feature. It's the first, device that offers XYZ. But at the end of the day, they had one line in their marketing campaign that they continued to go to spread, and that was 1,000 songs in your pocket. And I think there's a lot to learn from the simplicity of that message and how you're able to, uniquely engage with your audience, even when it means like having them become interested in something they don't yet know that they want or need. So that definitely is something I think creatively I tend to think about as we are weaving in what is the important objective within the narrative of our work. And that could really go into like many shapes and forms. It could go through like thought leadership at an event, like what we're talking about right now, and just the general theme and narrative of this conversation. It could go into creative campaigns and even just presentations. The number of times I've had discussions with even sales folks at our organization, expressing to them the importance of telling a story in a pitch. It's not just a bunch of information on a slide. Like, you really want to try to capture somebody's attention and get them interested and engaged in what you're trying to say is very important. And thankfully, design plays a big role in doing that as well.
Yeah, everything is kind of an opportunity to engage and to create that narrative. Tori, what do you see the role of narrative as being? How powerful is it? Do you have examples you could share?
Sure. I think Shayna said it perfectly. I'm always looking for ways to cut the copy. It's a goal of mine. Less is more. I think if we can say who, what, when, where, and why as fast and beautifully as possible, I think that's the goal. I know with sales presentations, we get a lot of copy heavy descriptions, and I think that we need to sort of dial back and think of the overall goal of showing someone what you have to offer. My favorite example from my work experience is I think it was before TikTok, before Vine. I said to my boss about promoting a film we were working on, I said, what if we could just buy a 5-second ad in the Super Bowl? And she said, you can't tell a story in 5 seconds. And now I'm thinking like, yeah, you can. And it would have been so cool to just do that, you know. It would probably cost $60,000, but now people are doing it. And it's funny how things change. And, you know, before it used to be that sex sells, and now it's, you know, definitely not. And so things change. And I think right now it's about clarity and brevity and getting to the point, because people's attention spans are so short these days.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of explains the rise of Twitter and TikTok and all these kind of very short format channels. It's a great point. Let's talk a little bit about creative integrity. I think every designer, every creative at some point has had to face this question of what does creative integrity mean? How can I practice my craft in a commercial context and stay true to my inner voice? So let me ask about creative integrity. What does that mean to you, Tori?
Yeah, I think it ties into narrative a lot. I think, you know, my biggest challenge is sort of like cutting out all of the calls to actions and all of the selling and all of the additional bursts. And we need to also say this, and we need to also say that, and sort of like jamming everything into one place. And then it just looks like sort of vomit. So I think, you know, weeding out the message is really part of the creative integrity, is making sure that it still looks good and has a clear message.
I think I need your editorial voice in my life. I am that copywriter that just spews endlessly. I could learn a lot from you, Tori. What about you, Kathy? What does creative integrity mean to you?
I mean, I think that there's, especially in the last like 3 years, thinking about the context in which your creative is living, like literally what are the news stories that your creative is living next to, which I know I don't really have to explain to anyone here, but, you know, I think at HBO we have a pretty like strong, like internal channel that like, whenever there's anything happening, it's like it's always considered, and like communications are always paused or like changed sometimes, or sometimes there are new sort of new directions that we pivot to like make sure that we're not throwing something that's just totally out of context or tone deaf, or just like not, it's just like not the thing that you want to see. So I think it's like being willing to not try to sell somebody something in a moment of, you know, like tragedy or turmoil. I also think it's about like sort of matching the tone of your audience and not talking down to them, especially you know, especially like different audiences on different platforms. Like something that's overproduced or over polished is very off-putting. So I think we put a lot of work into understanding who is this audience and how do they, like, what is their shorthand with each other, and how do we like make something that feels natural to that. I mean, I think other things that come to mind are just treating your vendors the same way you would treat your own team, like not being, you know, rude to your vendor, and being able to prepare them and like considering them as like a creative entity with their own, you know, set of people that are humans. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of other things I could say, but some of them fairly obvious, like, you know, naming your sources, your references, and compensating them fairly, seeking input, like via, you know, maybe it's like a short survey on your website, or an A/B test, or maybe you're sort of pulling your own team to like think about culture and things like that. I think getting input is good and learning from it.
I like that you ended where you did, because I think what I heard from everything you said is that, you know, creative integrity, it's really about, at its heart, it's about treating people, like human beings, you know, whether that's your end audience or user, whether that's your team, whether that's your stakeholders, just really taking into consideration, here's a human being that's going to have, whatever I put out is going to have impact, and like being willing to stop and take that into account. Thank you. These themes are so rich. I just want to remind the audience, this is a great chance to engage and ask whatever questions that you have for the women on the panel. So please feel free to send your questions, and we are going to save some time at the end to get to them. So send them in if there's anything you're curious about or you really want to hear from, or we would love to interact with you. And now I'd like to point to something that I've seen come up pretty frequently. I think there's a very common misconception around design and creative work, which is that it's very subjective, it's purely aesthetic, it's wishy-washy, or it's fluffy, and that it just kind of comes from this mysterious like bolt of inspiration that strikes you, and then suddenly there's a work. So I guess like this, let's take this moment to set the record straight. What do you each wish that your peers from other disciplines understood about your work? Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, this one, like, it resonated with me because it brings to mind, when people talk about, let's put a coat of paint on this, let's reskin it, let's, or the analogy where it's like, oh, it's, getting a design should be like ordering a sandwich, like hold pickles, please, make it red, not green. Like, I think that the common misconception here is that it is something that really is just visual, and it's kind of, floofy and very all about aesthetics. And in reality, it is an applied science. If you like, I'm not saying that everyone needs to have a degree to practice design, but if you get a degree in design, you get a Bachelor of Science. And I think that's for a reason, that it is really about solving problems, and there's a really methodical approach to doing that that's equal parts informed by research, like overall strategy, and then also what is our strategy, how does our strategy inform different parts of this project? And some of that is visual language, and sometimes it's not visual. So yeah, I mean, that's what I would say.
Love it. Very well said. Shayna.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you really want to irk any creative, any designer in particular, just don't tell them to make something look pretty. It doesn't matter if it's an invitation for a baby shower, like there's thought that goes into everything, and it is like the most annoying thing probably that you could say. But to Kathy's point, it's hard work. It's informed by research and insights, and I mean, sometimes it's inspiration. But the thing is that literally, if you take, and I was just chatting with somebody about this week, if you take a step outside of your apartment, your house, any day, and you go for a walk, you get in your car, you go anywhere, your entire life is touched by design in some way. It could be wayfinding, it could be street signs, it could be an industrial designer designing the car that you're driving. It could be a UX designer designing an interface that you're interacting with to talk to your family or to, take pictures, whatever it is. Like every single facet of your life is touched by design. And it has such a profound, I think, just way in which our lives are led because of it. If we had a world without design, that wouldn't be a world I would want to live in. So I just wanted to kind of, reinforce the importance of it. The other thing, kind of to what I was mentioning with the Apple example, is just that design really helps simplifies things that are very complex and complicated. I work in an industry where we have to come up with campaigns around things like identity and privacy and connected TV, and like a lot of nebulous programmatic terms that sometimes it can be really confusing. And it's important, just even from, of course, the voice and tone and language and how we're communicating with people on a verbal and written form is important as well. But visually, finding ways for us to kind of simplify complex notions so that people can, that you're making like complicated notions more accessible for people is so important. I mean, that's why when you're even like looking through a web experience, accessibility plays such a big part in people's ability to read and experience, a website as well. So good design definitely helps simplify the complicated, and that could take from forms like, I don't know, just hierarchy and composition. And there's a lot, I guess I just want to mention that goes into a creative's mind, a designer's mind, and how they're thinking through complicated subjects. So don't tell anyone to make something look pretty, because that will definitely frustrate us. But do know that it's a very important skill set that's changing the world.
Very well said. I think even if you don't understand the science that goes into it, you're going to feel the impact. So, if you have a tendency to say something diminishing about that, maybe rethink it. All right, let's dig in a little deeper then. So let's talk about, what is that creative process? What is some of the work that goes into that? Shayna, how do you go about tackling a brief?
That's a good question. I think that, it's funny. I remember before the advent of Pinterest, I had I don't know, just like a folder on my desktop that literally was crammed with just things that I would pull from the interwebs. I'm sure everybody on this panel has probably experienced the feeling of pulling something out of a magazine or kind of saving something for a rainy day that inspired them. It could be a photograph you took of an interesting typeface. It could be going to a museum and seeing something interesting. So I think cataloging and collecting interesting pieces of inspiration is sort of, for me, is kind of a crucial way to start. And then from there, I think it's different for every single person. I'm sort of a sponge that way, that I really like to collect different artifacts and creative, pieces of creative inspiration, and surround myself with it that way. But I think the other kind of point is just the collaborative. It's kind of to what I was speaking earlier, where if you only kind of resulted in where you think something should go, then you're going to have a very narrow view of what the possibilities could be. So another way, I guess, a part of my creative process is really surrounding myself with people that have interesting ideas, and together kind of working in a collaborative environment in order to come up with interesting work, I think is an important piece as well.
That's so key. And I think we could probably do a whole other panel on creating in collaboration, or the role of a creative community to successful design. And I feel like that's just like an untapped area for us to explore, but I'm happy that we got to at least touch on it in this conversation. Tori, tell us about your creative process.
I think the problem solving portion of it is sort of figuring out how to make a problem not a problem, how to make it interesting. For us at the Post, it's a lot about how to make it fun. And I think utility is also an important part of it. You don't want to just make something for the sake of it. So I think a good example of us is we had a client who wanted to promote a show that was about Texas, but they wanted to promote it in New York. And there's really not much of a line you can draw between New York City and Texas. So I think coming up with ways to make that feel authentic is a really challenging process. But how do you make it also fun and memorable? And thinking about how the person is going to experience it and what the outcome is going to be for them. So for us, for example, for that one, it was like a lot of our programs that are experiential involve cover wraps and wrapping the paper with the advertising and having people hand out papers and having them dress up and, including things like free food and things like that. So for that one, we did like a Texas chili food truck with cover wraps and people all dressed up. So it's sort of like bringing Texas to New York in a fun and engaging way that people who are hungry will want to enjoy.
New Yorkers do seem to really enjoy good food. I'm discovering that this week. Great, thank you for sharing. Turning back again to what it's like to be a woman in leadership and some of the challenges that we face. Often, I think women in leadership are told to act tough or to be tough to gain credibility. But each of you in our initial conversation mentioned vulnerability as a really important part of your craft. And I'm curious, how do you balance those? Have you found yourself at times erring on one side or another? And how do you kind of reconcile that or let go of that pressure to be tough? Tori, let me come back to you.
Sure. I think being tough is more than just speaking loud and holding back tears and demanding results. I think for me, I'm never the loudest person in the room, but my superpower is just staying calm and approaching problems, I think, differently than a lot of not my peers, not my team, but the rest of the people that we interact with in the company. I like to think that I can trust my own process, and I know that even if I'm not the first person to answer the question, that I'm someone that can think about it and listen to what the problem is. And I think a lot of people want to, chime in and be the first to answer and talk really loud. And I think that's not being tough, and that's not, that's a different way to do it. So I think, you eventually, even if you're not the first to speak up, people understand that you're thinking about it and that you're listening, and they appreciate you for that. Does that answer?
It sounds like someone who's really learned to trust her voice.
It's taking time. Yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah, it's a process for sure.
Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of, another kind of poignant question, because I think like what I immediately think of when I see this question is how very early on my first job, I remember getting my first performance review, which I saved. And I in the extended part where we all reviewed each other, I was told simultaneously that I was both too quiet and also that I was too forceful. So I think it's like really funny looking back at that as sort of like an adult person, because it really underlines how and again, I'm going to say like if I'm female, because since I'm female, but I think it applies to a lot of people, but like if you're female, people are going to find a way to they're going to pick at you a little bit, and and they're going to feel really comfortable giving you notes and like criticism. So it's almost freeing in a way, because it sort of points at the fact that like it's kind of BS that you have to act any one specific way to succeed. Like really what should matter is the results you're getting, the creative that you're making, and sort of like the impact that you're having on people's lives. But I agree with Tori that I think that our society is like socially conditioned to think that the loudest person in the room, the person who talks the most, the person who kind of gives the most like swaggery pieces of feedback that are like full of extreme points of view on creative, like that's the person in charge. But I think being tough is a lot more about your endurance. It's about sort of being able to hang in there and be methodical to the end of the project, and really think about things that nobody else wants to think about, like the budget, or whether whether you've overinvested in a number of revisions that you've done and you need to sort of pull it back. Like there's a lot that that I would say is about being tough that really has nothing to do with like the words that are coming out of your mouth. It's just like, are you actually showing up every day? So that's what I would say. And then I think my final note would just be like, I definitely sympathize with, or like empathize with like the note about acting tough, because I think that was the thing I was always so worried about. I was so worried that I couldn't act that way. It didn't feel natural to me. I think in reality, everybody has a strength, and being able to be quiet and let other people speak is really underrated, and it is something that's kind of important.
And when you reframe toughness more as endurance and sticking it out and tenacity, I think it's not so diametrically opposed to vulnerability, and it creates space for both of those things to exist side by side. That's such a great insight. Before we start addressing the questions from the audience, and we're getting some wonderful ones, I'm really excited to pose these to you. Let me just ask you, what inspires you? This is for all three of you. So Tori, let me go to you. What inspires you?
I was just sort of thinking back to the question about what else would you do, and I think that it's kind of the same answer. I think it's spaces. I think a room with a view and something cozy is good. I get inspired by beautiful architecture and gorgeous settings, I guess.
That's great. Shayna?
Yeah, I have, I guess, a couple of answers to that one. I think the first one was, I'm sure a lot of people saw Sheryl Sandberg left Meta recently, and I was reading an article in the New York Times, and what caught my eye was that in Silicon Valley of female leadership there, 4.8% of female leaders in the tech industry in Silicon Valley are female, which blew my mind, actually. You think like over 50% of this earth is female, and yet only 4.8% of women are represented in leadership roles. So I think what inspires me is to, I don't know, get more like women leadership and have our voices more represented within the workforce, especially after the pandemic. I saw a lot of working moms have to make decisions where they've left their career in order to, to be with their family. So I think in particular, that's something that really inspires me. It's something I take seriously because I know, I definitely want to inspire the next generation of female leadership. And I guess the other thing is just my children. I guess on the other spectrum of that, I think there's something really interesting about how kids think, and sort of that, as you get older, there's so many things you start to forget through the lens of like a child's eyes and what they see and recognize. And I think it just gives me a bigger appreciation for, I don't know, some simple things that you might like overlook otherwise, and what seems so special and interesting through the eyes of children. So that's probably my thought around that.
I love that. It's kind of like recapturing that wonder and the ability to not take anything for granted, but to see it as just like worth marveling at, I think. So what do we get from the eyes of children? Kathy, what inspires you?
I think people inspire me. And I say people, but like literally just other artists like doing different things, doing their own thing and kind of their points of view. I think what sort of pulled me in the direction that I'm currently in was just like, as a freshman in college, like walking past the senior exhibit for digital design. And at the time, like, it sounds sort of silly now because it's all like, the world's advanced so much, but the one of the seniors had used a green screen and had like the ability to composite the footage into a music video. And then someone else had created this like interactive soundscape. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I need to do this because it's like combining all these different interests I have with like music and like sort of almost like acting or like immersive theater or something, along with like coding and like science. It's really fascinating. And I think for me, like, just like seeing a really cool rollover might like get me going in the morning. I guess that's what I would say inspires me.
I love that. I have to agree. I think for me, it's like when I feel like I can connect the dots between something that somebody has as a need and something that I know myself or my team can deliver, and then what's happening in the market. Like when all that comes together into something we could collaboratively create, that's the most satisfying feeling. And then when you see in your client's eyes like that you nailed it, and like they're lit up and they're so excited, that's so inspiring for me. But all right, let's talk about our audience questions. We have some great ones here. The first one is from Deborah. How did you start to believe in and really enjoy your hard work? Who would like to take this one?
I'll try to be polite. I can go. Yeah, I mean, I think I struggled with that a lot in the beginning. And what did it for me was I actually, so I worked for a while in the work world, and I worked at a couple different agencies, and I just was totally burnt out after like 3 or 4 years. I had just been working weekends. I'd been like sleeping at the office, and I needed to stop. And I had a friend who convinced me to go freelance and just quit my job and like take a chance and go freelance. And I did that. And while that was like, it was a very interesting year for me, and I ultimately decided that it wasn't for me. It really taught me the monetary value of my time. And it taught me like on an individual basis that people were willing to exchange money for like me personally, what I was doing. And there wasn't anyone else to sort of like put that on. It was like, I'm the only one in this company of one. And that was really empowering to realize like, no, they like me, like they like my stuff. And I think when I sort of came back to the office, I had a really different perspective because I had spent a year orchestrating my own schedule and like deciding what I wanted to do and didn't want to do. And I was like the healthiest I had ever been. And I did feel like, you know, I set all these boundaries as a freelancer, and now I feel confident that I feel better about speaking up about like wanting to leave at like an appropriate time. And it really changed my mindset. It made me really believe that I was good enough as I was. My work was good enough to get money by itself, and that people would still want to work with me, even if I said, hey, I don't want to sleep at the office. Like, so that's what did it for me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can see that being really profound. Like there is a very specific and real and tangible value to the talent that you have. All right, here's another good question. This one's from Milena. She would like to know, who are the biggest references for you in the world of design? Who would like to take this one?
I don't know. I feel like that's such a tough one because there's, I don't know, an endless supply of answers that one could give. Oh my goodness. I mean, I think that in terms of just designers that have been quite influential, Saul Bass has been probably pretty high up for me. I think just the general notion of design as like a very like form and function of the simplicity and what you're able to develop and express to people. I think actually, Tori, you maybe had mentioned it earlier. It's that some of the best design, it can be quite simple. I'm trying to remember what the line was for Dieter Ram. There's like a famous line around the simplicity of, or less is more. And so I think for me, that probably would be, you know, a pretty good answer. But I mean, honestly, I think I'm so right now inspired by a lot of artists that are even on just like an Instagram. I find myself in an endless rabbit hole of looking at people's reels and motion design and just cataloging and saving work, because it truly does inspire so much of the work myself and my team does.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I had a professor in school named James Victoria, who I would highly recommend. He has a book called Feck Perfection, which is just
nice. It's a new Pobody's Nerfect, right? Cool. I'll have to check it out. All right, so here's a question from Maria, and I think this goes a little deeper in the question that we talked about earlier about media and the responsibility that we have. So Maria would like to know, you know, we know that the media has been from the beginning an important weapon that can shape the meaning of what it means to be a woman. For example, in the 40s and 50s, there were so many messages in the media about women being the housewife. And thinking about this, what is the weight that you carry as women and as leaders within the creative universe to bring communication and representation to people that are consuming what you create?
A juicy question. I mean, I think the answer is in 2022, like you have all kinds of messages that you're absorbing as a woman that like, it's basically all of the above. Like the 1940s and 50s stuff didn't get removed to make way for the other stuff. It's like you somehow have to be, you know, you feel pressure to be like the perfect spouse, the perfect parent, the perfect, you know, like household influencer, like house homemaker person. But you also are, you know, you feel pressure to like make a good living and be a really inspiring professional to others, and so like be nice to everyone that you work with, but also be firm with them. Like so I mean, I think it's like there's a lot of really contradictory expectations, honestly, and I think that as you know, like to me what it means is just like you reaching out to other people like we're doing right now, reaching out to other women or like other people who kind of like are trying to like figure out how to make their way, and there's a lot of like there's a lot of good stuff in there to be found, because it's not a one-way thing. It's like you might be giving advice sometimes, but other times you're just, you know, kind of sitting back and admiring being surrounded by this kind of inspiration. And it does take the pressure off having to be all these different things, because you can look around you and see like, oh well, this person didn't do that and they've still made it. I guess that's how I would answer it.
Yeah, I like that. So the next two questions, I'm gonna pose them together because I think they get at different sides of something we all think a lot about. The first question is, can you please share a little bit about your work ethic in your early days in the journey and what kept you motivated? And then the second question that I think is on the other side of that is, how are you able to balance your family with work and your passion? So maybe, you know, talking about that, like the work ethic and staying the course, but also finding balance and finding boundaries. Who would like to take that one?
I can give that one a shot. I think as a young designer, I was working constantly. I was freelancing along with full-time jobs and pulling all-nighters and just doing anything. I took any job that I could. And it was exhausting. And at some point, you know, I did the same as Kathy. I decided, you know what, forget it. I'm gonna freelance and see what happens. And eventually, I found something that was a good fit and allowed me to have nights and weekends again, and eventually got better positions. And I think along with sort of the better positions, it was a little bit of less like stress, like I have to do all of these things. And it was more thoughtful, and it was more time for myself. And now with kids, especially with the opportunity now to work from home, the pressure is really alleviated on the family and work life. I think it's been a huge help to have the opportunity to be able to stay home sometimes. And we have now we're doing 2 to 3 days a week in the office, and it's very helpful.
Yeah.
I would add to that, like, it's not just about finding the right job that'll allow that. It's about feeling okay asking for what you need. And for me, that was the biggest battle that I had to fight, was with myself about like making it okay for myself to say like, no, I'm gonna leave at 6, not 10. Like, and when I did, like a lot of people were open to that, and the people who weren't, who were like, no, you need to work 10 hours. It just made it really clear that it was like the wrong job.
Yeah. These are such great questions, and we do have more, but I want us to wrap up on time. So I'm just going to ask you each for a closing thought. If you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be? And we'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Shayna, what would you give yourself?
I think something I recognized too late probably is just the notion of self-care. I think just, I don't know, if I could go back in time and be like, Shayna, just take care of yourself. Don't always worry about everyone first, you know, take the time you need to take care of it, especially in the world we live in right now.
Tori?
I was going to say similarly that I constantly was making sure to please other people. And I think that, I mean, it worked out fine, but it was probably not the best way to go about, you know.
Kathy?
I would say don't be in such a rush. There's plenty of time. You have so much time and you don't realize it.
Great. Tori, Kathy, Shayna, this has been such a beautiful discussion, so vulnerable. Thank you for sharing of yourself so deeply, sharing your knowledge, your insights. I loved this panel, and I think our audience did too. We had so much engagement. So I want to just say thank you so much for agreeing to participate, and I hope we can do a repeat performance at some point, because I think there's so many topics we just started to scratch the surface of. So thank you so much for being here as panelists, and to our audience, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening and caring about the topic. And we hope that you came away inspired. Have a great night.